In our headlines on this Wednesday afternoon, December 20th, here on the peninsula. Top diplomats of the Group of Seven denounced North Korea's latest launch of an intercontinental ballistic missile, pointing out that it follows 4 previous ICBM testings this year, as well as other launches using ballistic missile technology. Meanwhile, Israel opens up prospects for another ceasefire in war-torn Gaza in return for hostages held by the Palestinian militant group Hamas as international condemnation of civilian casualties mounts. And Russia's Vladimir Putin pledges to push ahead with his military offensive against Ukraine, claiming that Russia will, quote, not give up what belongs to it, as Ukraine has yet to secure a tangible guarantee of more US aid from its Congress. In a statement shared on Tuesday, foreign ministers representing the Group of Seven condemned North Korea's, quote, repeated reckless actions and called for a prompt and powerful global response led by the UN Security Council. But despite these calls, the Council's latest meeting came to a close with no consensus. Our Shin Se-byuk reports.
The UN Security Council meeting was held in New York on Tuesday to address North Korea's evolving military threats, but ended without a concrete outcome. The meeting was convened following Pyongyang's test firing of its most advanced ICBM missile on Monday, which has the potential to reach the U.S. During the meeting, a senior UN official for political affairs, Khaled Kiari, strongly criticized Pyongyang's continuing provocations.
Any launch by the DPRK using ballistic missile technology is a violation of relevant Security Council resolution.
North Korea, however, dismissed the criticism, saying it is exercising its sovereign right as recognized by international law. Tuesday's UNSC meeting ended without any tangible results, but South Korea, the U.S., and 8 other countries released a joint statement before the meeting, which called on the North to abandon its unlawful missile programs. G7 ministers also issued a joint statement on Tuesday condemning Pyongyang's latest launch of ICBM in, quote, the strongest terms. It also urged the international community to take firm and unified action against North Korea's, quote, reckless nuclear and missile threats. The statement also criticized Pyongyang for arms transfers to Moscow and urged for a halt to such activities and for North Korea to abide by relevant UN Security Council resolutions. Meanwhile, U.S. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller on Tuesday spoke of a shift in the country's North Korean policy while reaffirming full commitment to its 2 Asian allies.
We have tried to make it a policy of never not reacting to every provocative statement that he makes. And our commitments to the defense of the Republic of Korea and Japan remain ironclad.
Miller, however, said the U.S. has no hostile intent towards the North and called on the regime to engage in dialogue. Shin Se-byuk, Arirang News.
On the local political front, Seoul's spy agency and its foreign ministry are looking at new heads of operations in the latest reshuffle of the Yoon administration's cabinet amid preparations for next April's parliamentary election. Our Peunji has their names and more.
President Yoon Suk-yeol has named current National Security Advisor Cho Tae-yul as the head of the country's intel agency. He will be filling the vacancy created after the National Intelligence Service Director Kim Kyu-hyun resigned last month. Cho, a veteran diplomat, joined the foreign ministry in 1980, and his career has mainly been focused on U.S. affairs and North Korean issues. Prior to becoming the National Security Advisor, he was the country's ambassador to the U.S. and served as the first deputy chief of the Presidential National Security Office during the Park Geun-hye administration. Cho said he is aware that the intel agency's role is to present accurate information at the right time to help the country make the right decisions.
I'll make utmost efforts to make the National Intelligence Service becomes one of the best intel agencies in the world.
And the former ambassador to the United Nations, Cho Tae-yul, was nominated as the country's new foreign minister. Also a veteran diplomat, the presidential office explained that he has expertise in bilateral and multilateral diplomacy, especially in the field of economy and trade. After starting his career as a diplomat in 1979, he served as the ambassador to Spain and the chairman of the World Trade Organization Dispute Panel. Cho said he feels a heavy weight on his shoulders at a time of major geopolitical shifts, noting the intense competition between the U.S. and China and the Ukraine war.
I will do my best to strengthen the foundation for national security and prosperity by expanding the nation's diplomatic position and our strategic space.
The National Assembly will be holding confirmation hearings, but the president can effectively make the appointments since parliamentary approval for ministerial positions is not mandatory. Tuesday's nominations come amid escalating tensions on the Korean peninsula and a cabinet reshuffle in recent weeks, with incumbent ministers and top secretaries leaving their posts to run for parliament next April. As for the new National Security Advisor, a senior presidential official said the nominee will be announced after further reviews. Amid global supply chain risks, the official also said the presidential office will create a new position of a third deputy National Security Advisor to handle economic security issues. Currently, the first deputy advisor handles foreign policy issues, while the second deputy is in charge of national defense. 배은지, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the Foreign Minister nominee Cho Tae-yul has highlighted the importance of Seoul's ties with both Beijing and Washington. In the case of the former, that is Beijing, Cho shared his commitment to seeking ways to promote a peaceful and productive partnership. He further pledged to pursue appropriate diplomatic policies, keeping in mind the current geopolitical standoff between Seoul, Tokyo and Washington on one side, and Beijing, Pyongyang and Russia on the other. In a shift from its earlier stance, Israel has touched upon the possibility of another ceasefire in exchange for the release of hostages held by Hamas. Our Lee Seung-jae covers these prospects.
The Israeli military's continuing airstrikes and ground offensives in Gaza has resulted in thousands of civilian deaths. And that has led to growing international condemnation, including from traditional allies. The United States has also called on Israel to scale back its attacks to target only Hamas. Amid growing criticism, Israeli President Isaac Herzog has said his country is willing to agree a new temporary truce with Hamas in Gaza in exchange for more hostages. Speaking to a gathering of ambassadors on Tuesday, Herzog said Israel is ready for another humanitarian pause and additional humanitarian aid in order to enable the release of hostages. The previous 7-day temporary ceasefire last month led to the release of 86 women and children held by Hamas in exchange for 240 Palestinian women and teenagers held in Israeli jails. The militant group also released 24 foreign nationals during that period. Meanwhile, Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh is expected to visit Egypt on Wednesday to hold ceasefire talks, raising hopes for another temporary pause in Gaza. However, Israeli Defense Chief Yoav Gallant says its military plans to expand its ground offensives in the Gaza Strip to other areas. He added that through the expansion of the ground offensives, Israel will bring high-ranking Hamas officials to the graveyard or prison. He also said that Khan Yunis, where many refugees from the north of Gaza fled, has become the center of terrorism, adding the military will continue its operations in the region. Meanwhile, the director of Kamal Adwan Hospital in Gaza admitted that Hamas has turned hospitals into military facilities under its control. The comments came during an interrogation by the Israel Security Agency, where the director revealed how the militant group uses hospitals for military purposes, including hiding its operatives, conducting military activities, and moving its members. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Elsewhere, Russia's Vladimir Putin has pledged to maintain his military offensive against Ukraine in the new year. Our Yoon covers his comments.
Russian President Vladimir Putin spoke at a defense leadership meeting in Moscow on Tuesday, during which he stressed that Russia will not give up what he called its territory, adding that Moscow will not abandon the goals of its special military operation.
The West is not abandoning its strategy of containing Russia and its aggressive goals in Ukraine. Well, we are not going to give up our goals for a special military operation.
He said Russia had taken on 490,000 contract and voluntary soldiers in 2023, adding that next year, Russia will try to boost those forces to 745,000 men. During his meeting with the Defense Ministry, Putin said if Western countries or Ukraine want to hold talks with Russia, he's ready to do so, but it would be on Russia's terms.
History will put everything in its place. We won't interfere, but we won't give up our territory. This is what everyone in Ukraine, Europe and the USA, everyone who is aggressive towards Russia should understand. If they want to negotiate, let them negotiate. We will only do it based on our interests.
Putin also reiterated that Ukraine's accession to NATO, even if it's 10 or 15 years from now, is unacceptable. Meanwhile, at an end-of-year news conference on Tuesday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that he was confident his country would continue to receive important financial support from the US and the EU.
As for financial assistance, we are working very hard on it. I am sure that the United States of America will not betray us, and that what we have achieved with the United States will be fulfilled.
He added that no one knows when the war in Ukraine will end, but the moment could be brought closer if everything necessary for victory is done. Russia annexed Crimea in 2014, and in 2022 claimed the 4 additional regions of Ukraine that its troops partially control are part of Russia. Kyiv says it will not rest until every last Russian soldier is ejected from Ukraine. 이은진, Arirang News.
At the National Assembly on this Wednesday, it's a race against time as the Parliament seeks to reach a consensus on next year's budget bill. The floor leaders of the ruling People Power Party and the main opposition Democratic Party of Korea are meeting this afternoon for related discussions ahead of a vote at the plenary session scheduled for tomorrow, that is Thursday. Lawmakers across the aisle had earlier failed to narrow their differences over the budget bill by the December 2nd legal deadline. Korea raked in an annual average of $15 billion in weapons exports over the past 2 years. According to Seoul's Defense Ministry on this Wednesday, the country's arms sales this year amount to just below $14 billion, while last year Korea secured a record $17.3 billion. Regardless of the retreat in arms exports this year, Korea saw its export markets expand in 2023 to 12 nations from 4. There's also been more diversity in terms of the types of exports of weapons exported, that is, from 6 in 2022 to 12 this year. Aside from profits, the ministry believes greater weapons exports will bolster the military's logistics capabilities by securing more overseas production bases. Also here in Seoul on this Wednesday, the second Korea-Africa Trade and Industry Cooperation Forum kicked off amid preparations for next year's summit-level meeting. According to the industry ministry, some 100 people, including delegations from 17 African countries, were in attendance. The ministry adds the forum seeks to spur economic initiatives between Korea and Africa. Meanwhile, the Korea-Africa Summit will be held in Seoul next May. As of 2019, Korea has in operation a special team of experts assigned with the task of thwarting technology theft. Our Cho Tae-yul explains.
Advanced semiconductor technology was about to be leaked to China. 3 domestic companies were involved, and even the smallest among them could have suffered losses exceeding 100 billion won, or roughly $75.8 million. Damages could have escalated exponentially if the crime had gone unnoticed, as company employees were involved.
Pictures were taken using a mobile phone, and presentation materials were created and delivered to Chinese companies.
The agency that prevented the theft was the Korean Intellectual Property Office's Technology and Design Police Division. Formed in March 2019, the division is comprised of examiners who worked in patent examination at the KIPO. With diverse experts including doctorates, lawyers, and forensic specialists, and by incorporating police investigative techniques, it can prevent significant crimes.
We accurately determine which technology has been infringed. Then we employ police investigative techniques starting from covert operations, suspect interrogations, informant interviews, on-site inspections.
As the effectiveness of the technology police in detecting theft increases, related support is also expanding. Penalties for technology theft, often considered lenient, are being strengthened. An industrial property dispute resolution support center will be established to mediate disputes between companies and, if necessary, involve the KIPO division. With the establishment of the Joint Response Team for Technology Leakage, there are plans to also actively respond to international disputes.
With global technological competition intensifying, stealing technology is much faster than developing it. That's why international issues of technology theft are widely discussed.
In the past 5 years, 93 cases of industrial technology leakage overseas have caused estimated damage of 25 trillion Korean won, or roughly $18.9 billion US. 정은주, Arirang News.
And in other news, Iceland's Reykjanes Peninsula exploded in volcanic eruptions Monday night, marking its fourth such explosion in fewer than 3 years. Our An Sang-jin reports.
A volcano in the southwestern part of Iceland erupted on Monday evening. The eruption on the Reykjanes Peninsula released bursts of glowing lava onto the landscape and huge plumes of smoke more than 100 meters into the sky. This comes after weeks of seismic activity since the underground magma chamber formed in November.
Did the eruption come as a surprise? Yes and no is the answer. So yes, because we did not expect it will start tonight. Yeah. No, because we have seen precursors since many weeks, actually since October.
This prompted an evacuation order for the nearby town of Grindavik with slightly over 3,000 residents. The Icelandic government has said the eruption does not pose a threat to life, but has warned people to stay out of the area as gas emitted from it can be dangerous. Nearby roads are closed to all traffic except emergency teams. However, international flight corridors remain open, though some flight schedules to and from Iceland were delayed. Though hundreds of cubic meters of lava were being released every second in the first 2 hours of the eruption, the intensity soon diminished by early Tuesday, with lava spreading laterally. An expert provided an insight on how long this eruption would last.
It is impossible right now to establish how long it is going to be the eruption. But comparing with the previous history of Icelandic eruption, realistically, it's going to last no more than a few months.
Iceland sits on a tectonic plate boundary which makes it a volcanic hotspot in the North Atlantic. It is home to 32 active volcanoes. The most disruptive in recent times was a 2010 eruption of Eyjafjallajökull volcano, which led to huge ash clouds from glacial ice that led to widespread airspace closures over Europe and the Atlantic. Experts say that this most recent volcanic eruption won't cause the same level of chaos as seen in 2010. An Sang-jin, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at the latest news in the world now. The death toll from the 6.2 magnitude earthquake that hit China's Gansu province on Monday night has now increased to at least 127 people, making it China's deadliest earthquake since 2014. Local authorities reported that a total of 113 people have been killed in Gansu and 14 in the neighboring Qinghai province, with over 700 injured so far. The earthquake has also damaged over 155,000 properties in Gansu. Emergency services have so far rescued 74 people, while over 4,000 were evacuated. The freezing temperatures of below -10 degrees Celsius are adding to the difficulties. This is China's deadliest earthquake since 2014, when more than 600 people were killed in the country's southwestern Yunnan province. The United States and 9 other nations have launched a multinational force on Tuesday to defend ships passing through the Red Sea. This comes as at least a dozen shipping lines have suspended their routes through the Red Sea due to the attacks by Houthi rebel forces in Yemen. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin announced Tuesday in Bahrain that the U.S., Bahrain, Canada, France, Italy, the Netherlands, Norway, the Seychelles, Spain, and the UK have formed the patrol force to counter Houthi attacks in the southern Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. On Monday, the rebel group announced that it attacked the Norwegian Swan Atlantic and the MSC Clara with naval drones. Meanwhile, the US and UK naval forces reported that they've shot down a total of 15 drones over the weekend in the waterway. In the U.S., the Republican governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, approved a new law on Monday that will make illegal border crossings from Mexico punishable under state law, authorizing state officials to arrest migrants and seek deportation. The new law, named SB 4, would give Texas law enforcement the authority to stop and arrest anyone suspected of illegal border crossing anywhere within the state, except in schools and hospitals. Historically, authority for immigration law falls under the U.S. federal government, so this law will likely face legal challenges. Meanwhile, Mexican President Obrador on Tuesday called the new law inhumane and is also preparing to challenge the bill. Abbott said that the goal of Senate Bill 4 is to stop the tidal wave of illegal entry into Texas. The new bill is set to take effect in March 2024. Kim Seong, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. Snowy roads and freezing temperatures, some of the worst weather conditions we want to face during the cold month. The west coast of Jeollabuk-do province and the mountainous regions of Jeju Island could see more than 30 centimeters of snowfall, while the rest of Jeollado province could see more than 20 centimeters of snow until tomorrow. Also, a heavy snow advisory was issued in Jeollabuk-do and Chungcheong-namdo province, and the cold advisory remains in place for many of the upper regions, and the dry advisory remains in effect for east coast areas. Making matters worse is colder air. Seoul tops out at just -5 degrees Celsius this afternoon, about 5 degrees lower than yesterday. Daejeon at -3 degrees. Then please brace yourselves for -15 degrees tomorrow. Feels like temperatures will plunge to -21 degrees in the capital, but the cold snap will ease just in time for Christmas. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
And those are the headlines at this hour here in Korea. Coming up next is our panel session with our foreign journalists. Do stay with us.
Understated, yet harmonious and beautiful.
Growing tirelessly, but full of relaxation and romance. Thus, we expect the Republic of Korea to continue making history. From the past to the present and the future. This is K-Story. This is Korea.
저를 도와주시는 분들이
저희와 함께 해줄 수 있는 세션분들
아무리 봐도 먹지 텐션 같은데 아니라고 아무도 안 하는 거고.
좋아요.
North Korea test fires a Hwasong-18 intercontinental ballistic missile on Monday morning that reportedly holds the potential to reach the US. So what is the background behind this latest display of defiance? What is the relevance of the trilateral missile warning system that went into effect on Tuesday? And what are the nuclear contingency strategies to be adopted by Seoul and Washington starting next year? Welcome to Wednesday's edition of Issues and Insiders. I'm Min San-hee. Today we touch upon tensions on the Korean Peninsula amid fresh missile test launches by North Korea and more. For this, I have Jack Barton live on the line. Jack, it's good to have you on.
Pleasure to be here.
I also have Nicholas Smith with us. Nicola, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
Right then, Jack, let's begin with details about Pyongyang's latest provocations and their apparent purpose.
Well, the latest is the launch of the missile you just mentioned, the Hwasong-18. It's the fifth intercontinental ballistic missile test this year, but this seems to be by far their most advanced ICBM so far. We've heard from Japanese officials doing some of the maths, saying it flew at a lofted trajectory, about 6,500 kilometers, a little bit more in altitude, a distance of about 1,000 kilometers before it dropped down. And then when they did the maths, they said, well, if it were flying at a more horizontal sort of angle, then it could probably go about 15,000 kilometers. And that means it could actually hit anywhere on the mainland United States. So this is indeed a very powerful weapon. Pyongyang, the state media there, we see a statement from Kim Jong-un saying this is, of course, all in response to recent actions by the United States, and South Korea blaming what he describes as their hysteria. A reference there to the recent meeting between South Korea and the United States to rediscuss nuclear policy, and a decision at those meetings to begin to reevaluate nuclear policy strategy, or the strategy to how both would deal with a nuclear strike by the DPRK, and to keep updating those policies, but also to the new real-time information sharing agreement between the United States, Japan, and South Korea. But if we look back, we see that the DPRK announced last year when it enshrined its nuclear policy, it was going to be carrying out lots of tests. We're expecting many more tests to come. It's just they seem to be timing them whenever there's an event and then blaming it on whatever that event is and saying, see, this is all your fault.
Right, indeed. Nicola, as Jack mentioned, Pyongyang claims that the latest missile test launches come in response to plans by Seoul and Washington to enhance their nuclear contingency strategies. Could you tell us a bit more about these plans?
Yes, well, Jack mentioned a meeting between senior US and South Korean officials, and that happened on December 16th over the weekend. It was the second meeting of the Nuclear Consultative Group, which is a group that emerged out of the state visit by President Yoon to Washington earlier this year, and that it aims to shore up the extended nuclear deterrence commitments that the US has already made to South Korea, and also to integrate South Korea more into US planning for contingencies on the peninsula that might involve nuclear use. And this meeting made a very strong statement. They said that any nuclear attack by North Korea against the US or its allies is unacceptable and would result in the end of the Kim regime. They also said that any nuclear attack by North Korea on South Korea would be met with swift, overwhelming and a decisive response. And the group has already, the two countries have already been deepening cooperation on things like information sharing protocols, nuclear consultation processes in crises, and nuclear strategic planning. But during this meeting, they also agreed to update the nuclear deterrence and contingency strategies and incorporate nuclear operations scenarios in combined military exercises. And this is what has alarmed North Korea and what it's been responding to. So there haven't been many details about what this actually means, but South Korea's Deputy National Security Advisor, who was at that meeting, said that they had agreed to complete guidelines for the planning and operation of a nuclear strategy by the middle of next year. And all of this has really been designed to ease South Korea's worries about North Korea's provocations, which have been increasing over the past couple of years, while also keeping Seoul from pursuing its own nuclear weapons program. But North Korea, as Jack said, sees this as a major threat and has said that any attempt to use military force against it will be met with deadly counteraction.
Right. And Jack, you mentioned the missile warning system. This particular system shared by Seoul, Tokyo and Washington, it went into effect as of Tuesday. What would you say is the relevance of this trilateral collaboration?
This is very important. In the past, Japan shared information with the United States in real time, and South Korea shared information with the US in real time, but Japan and South Korea didn't share the information, at least in real time. They could apply for the information and then get it later, but these two are really an asset to each other, because you could say that Japan has very good reach into the East Sea. And so if there are missiles or there are activities in the East Sea, Japan is very good at sweeping up that information. Whereas South Korea, because of its proximity, obviously, to North Korea, is very good at detecting launches, seeing launches before they happen, and getting a lot of real-time information on what's happening on the peninsula. So in terms of Japan's defense, it's definitely improved by knowing what's happening in real time in North Korea, which it couldn't previously. And for South Korea also, Japan, of course, is much better at monitoring submarine activity. And this is the big danger, because we keep looking at the big, like the long-range missiles and even the medium-range missiles. They're quite easy to shoot down. But a short-range nuclear-tipped missile from a submarine is very difficult to intercept unless you get to it very quickly. And that's the kind of information that Japan can now give to South Korea in real time. So that's a big boost to the security of both countries. Now, having said that, of course, at the same time, North Korea is upgrading its capabilities. We've seen the recent spy satellite launch. Now it seems like they're trying to build an AWAC plane, which is a type of plane most people have seen. It's got like a UFO disc on the top, and it's very good at tracking submarines and also detecting launches. So overall, there is a race for real-time security. But this agreement between Japan, South Korea, and the United States, I think in a way it's a game changer in terms of early warning systems for Japan and South Korea.
Right, and speaking about early warning systems, Nicola, like Jack was saying, North Korea is believed to be building an early warning radar plane, I hear. What are the implications of this particular initiative?
Yes, well, what we know so far is that satellite imagery is suggesting that North Korea may be building an airborne early warning and control aircraft. And this satellite imagery has come from Planet Labs and has been analysed by the James Martin Centre for Non-Proliferation Studies in the United States. And so if confirmed, this would offer Pyongyang advance warning of aircraft or missile strikes from the south. It's also quite surprising if the North has been able to add this to its Air Force fleet. As we know, this is mainly made up of aging Soviet-era aircraft. And so it could also suggest that Russia is helping with technology. We have no confirmation of that. But looking at its abilities, then it would certainly offer considerable advantages to Pyongyang if it would extend airborne radar coverage and provide prior warning of a potential attack from South Korea, incoming aircraft and missiles during the opening moments of a conflict. And it could also enhance its own surface-to-air missile equipment. And it would also provide a new tool for its own surveillance of the border, for monitoring South Korea's airspace and activities. It would provide a look-down capability that it currently doesn't have, which would help it to combat the problem of high terrain.
Right, and against that backdrop, Jack, here in South Korea, the Defense Ministry has spoken of boosting related spending over the next 5 years. What more can you share with us?
Yeah, they're talking about spending the equivalent of $87 billion over the next 5 years. It's a big jump from what has been spent. And already we saw big jumps because it's not just the Yoon administration, but even though the Moon administration negotiated hard with North Korea, it also oversaw a big boost in defense spending and a rearrangement of the armed forces. What we're going to see is this money, if it can be gathered, it'll go into the big three main areas of defense. So the kill chain, which is the missile systems that in theory would take out North Korean weapons before they could leave the ground, so when they're about to be fired. And then there's the air missile defense capability, which is to take out missiles while they're in the air. And finally, we have the Korea Massive Punishment and Retaliation Program. And they're talking about more troop-carrying planes, building up special forces, specialized forces that could operate inside North Korea. And of course, amongst all of this, also building up anti-drone capabilities. Because the big takeout from the war in Ukraine that everybody is learning right now is in modern warfare, sometimes aeroplanes and even armor tanks are quite useless. And it's really coming down to troops, artillery and drones. So a big focus again on drones. But even with all of that in place, it's still the worrying factor. Who will be in the administration in the US next election? This is always a concern for South Korea because that really depends. It's on that the strength of the nuclear defense from the United States really hinges. And of course, someone like Joe Biden compared to someone like Donald Trump gives a very different sort of commitment level to South Korea. So this spending will make a lot of difference, but it's not going to bridge that ultimate gap. The fact that North Korea has nuclear weapons, South Korea doesn't, and it depends on the US.
Right, indeed. Nicholas, staying in South Korea, but moving beyond cross-border tensions, let's now talk about domestic headlines. First up, on the economic front, the IMF claims that the Korean economy has been rather resilient in the face of challenges, both at home and abroad. Speaking within your capacity as an Asia correspondent, Nicola, covering various events, of course, what do you believe has kept the South Korean economy afloat this particular year?
Well, the IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva said on Friday that the South Korean economy remains resilient amid signs of global recovery, and that inflation is forecast to moderate. She did talk quite extensively about the domestic reasons for this, while putting it in a wider context, and to just look firstly at the domestic reasons. She said that it was resilient because of, she credited an effective policy response within South Korea. She said that the Bank of Korea has taken decisive action since last year, and that financial authorities are pursuing fiscal normalization. And that the IMF supports the policy direction of South Korea. And she also said that the government has been acting responsibly to normalize its fiscal stance. And in this context, the IMF has projected growth in Korea to strengthen from 1.4% to 2.2% in 2024. There are also external factors. Outside factors are, of course, the Chinese economy is performing better than expected, according to the IMF. And so this is beneficial for export-orientated economies like South Korea. And China is obviously the biggest trading partner. So economic growth has held steady on the back of recovering exports, and looking specifically at semiconductors and machineries and equipment. And more generally, there have been recent hopes that of a resurgent global technology demand that will continue to drive Korean exports.
Right, hopefully. Jack, beyond the economy, the Yoon administration has also sought to address a host of issues within its academic arena. Which related initiative, Jack, do you care to shed light on as we look to end this year?
Well, a couple of my friends are Korean teachers, so the one I hear a lot is about the state in the schools at the moment, or the concerns that revolve around the Child Welfare Act, which of course was brought in to protect students, to stop them from physical, sexual or emotional abuse, and that's a good thing. Unfortunately, because it's a little bit vague, we've seen teachers now come under so much pressure that we've even seen a spate of recent suicides by teachers who are coming under a lot of parental pressure. Under this act, pretty much anyone can be accused of abuse, even if it's a lack of smiling at a child or not helping a child access the phone. Or my friend was telling me one story about how a teacher at their school, they'd be rung by the parents to say, you have to wake my child up every morning. You have to ring them and wake them up and tell them it's ready for school. And they said, look, I can't do that. And the teacher said, well, we're going to file against you for abuse. And when you get a charge of abuse, you are suspended. It's not like a process where you have to wait. So it's like 9 out of 10 teachers saying they fear abuse, a quarter of teachers getting psychiatric care. And now the Yoon government saying, you know, we want these protective measures in place, but we need to define what abuse is. So, you know, we really know if this is a case of abuse or not. And parents who wrongly accuse abuse and knowingly do so, they can get punished in turn. And a whole lot of reforms there just to ensure that teachers and students are both looked after. And the good news is, in this move, it's probably the only bit of legislation where the Democrat Party, the opposition party, seems to be on board. So both parties, you know, trying to move forward with this legislation that's going to bring a little bit of calm back into the classroom.
You're right, indeed. It's getting a bit of support from across the aisle. So, Nicola, also on the social front, findings shared this past Monday by Statistics Korea, I believe, show close to 3 out of 10 newlywed couples seek to pursue a double income, no kids lifestyle. Now, these findings have raised fresh alarm, that is, over Korea's population prospects. Do you believe this alarm, Nicola, is well-founded?
Yes, absolutely. The alarm bells have been ringing very loudly for years, and it's not that successive governments are not listening, or they haven't heard these alarms, but so far they haven't been able to find the right solutions to resolve the underlying reasons for this demographic crisis and for young people deciding that they don't want to or they can't have children. And this year we saw the fertility rate hit 0.7 children per woman in the second quarter of this year. And that was another record low for South Korea, which already has the world's lowest birth rate. So there clearly is an issue to be resolved here because the replacement level of 2.1 children that would keep the population steady at about 51 million is just not being met. And it's going to be very difficult to reverse that trend. We're looking at a super aging society by 2025, and we're also on the current trajectory. 2 out of 5 people will be age 65 or above by 2050, and that obviously has huge economic ramifications. It has implications for the workforce, for the military, socially. And so this is something that every government has been trying to resolve and to look at. And recently, Han Dong-hoon, the Justice Minister, put it in the starkest of terms that South Korea is facing extinction if it doesn't embrace immigration, which has been seen as one potential solution to trying to at least ease the crisis. He said that he was simply talking about a body that would oversee immigration, but it's a politically very contentious issue and one that governments are struggling to push through. And there are many other solutions that could be applied to this issue. All of them are quite difficult, again, politically, but we're looking at things like better childcare, more affordable housing, and even a better workplace culture, especially for young women who have invested so much in their education, their university. They've strived to get the job that they wanted to, and find in the workplace that it's not always possible or easy to have a child and keep that job.
Right, indeed. And staying with such potential solutions, Jack, I understand you're no expert on the matter, but what would you suggest or propose as potential measures to better address this very dismal-looking reality for South Korea?
I recently made a documentary on the topic, and, I think Nicola covered a lot of the sort of issues there. We've got the high housing costs, the education pressures here are astronomical. Per capita, it's the most expensive place in the world to raise a child. But interestingly, when I talked to a lot of people and a lot of, professors and economists, and at the end of it, it came down to one of the big factors here as well is the Confucian background. So the fact that women still go out and work, and they work long, tough hours, and then they come home and they have to do all the cooking and they have to do everything for the child as well. There's still an expectation in many households that the man just has to go to the office and then come home, and the woman has to go to the office and then come home and have her second job, which is to raise the child. And this is something that everybody at the end said needs to change, because if we look at the polls, far more men than women want to have babies. And in that light, it's understandable why. Having said that, if we look around the world, this is a global issue. The only reason it is so pressing in East Asia, again, as Nicola mentioned, is the lack of immigration. So in Australia, we have the same problem, but we make up for it with mass immigration. Now, the government is changing some of the policies, but it's looking more at extending working visas, so bringing more people into work, but that doesn't mean they have the right to stay on after, they finish the job. So it's a really tough issue going forward because robots aren't going to do it. They don't pay income tax, so they're not going to pay people's pensions in the future. There has to be some viable form of bringing new people into the workforce so they can contribute taxes and they can pay for that rapidly aging population. And right there are far more questions than answers, unfortunately.
Right, which is why governments across the world are seeking to better address this issue. All right, Jack, as always, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts today. And Nicola, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, well, that brings us to the end of this edition of Issues and Insiders. Thank you for watching, and be sure to join us same time tomorrow.
can I say? This place is amazing. Powers. Let's do it.
Oh my God, what an investment people did at this place, because it's like a huge place.
New thoughts, new emotions to come in. A place to kind of, I felt like I was able to flush out my tension in my body, my stress or whatever.
Cool.
저희 아이가 에너지가 너무 많아가지고 좀 신나게 하려고 하는데 오히려 와이프가 훨씬 더 좋아하는 것 같아서 여기가 바로 저희 가족이 진짜 찾던 곳이에요.
I felt like the inner child in me finally had a chance to come out. And we only did it once, but I wish I could have spent every day just doing the play one over and over and over again.
Yeah, right? I'm gonna go for a run. You gotta go, the man's gotta go.
Just come here. You don't need to know Taekwondo. Come here to chill and relax, rest your bones. There's the natural healing power of nature, which is also connected around the energy of Taekwondo and discipline. I recommend for anybody who wants to escape from the city, but just to relax. This is perfect. I would come.